They say the older you get, the less you care what people think. That's a lie. The older you get, the more you realize how much of your life was built on what other people wanted you to believe. And when you finally stop believing, when the story collapses, there's nothing heroic about it. There's no music, no applause, just silence. My name is Walter Grayson. I'm 70 years old, and I live in a quiet stretch of coastal America where the mornings smell like salt and the evenings feel like unfinished conversations. I've lived here for almost 15 years, in a modest house with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaks like it's trying to confess something. Most days, I wake up before the sun, not because I'm disciplined, not because I'm healthy, because my body never learned how to rest in a world that doesn't keep promises. I make coffee the old way, in a dented pot I've had since the 90s. I sit at the kitchen table and listen to the refrigerator hum. Sometimes I watch the birds outside and pretend they're visiting me, like I'm still the sort of man a living thing would choose to be near. I used to think my life made sense. I had a wife, a home, a job I'd held for decades, neighbors who waved, a church down the road where people shook my hand and called me a good man. It wasn't perfect, but it was a life you could hold in your hands and say, "This is mine." And then one Tuesday in late October, I opened a drawer I'd avoided for years. It wasn't dramatic at first, just ordinary. I was looking for a warranty paper for the water heater, something my wife, Elaine, insisted we kept somewhere safe. Elaine always had a way of saying safe like she meant controlled. She liked labels, lists, order. She liked believing the world could be managed if you stacked it neatly enough. The drawer stuck when I pulled it. I yanked harder, and it gave way with a sudden jerk that made the contents jump like startled fish. Old envelopes, mismatched keys, rubber bands turned brittle with age, and a fat folder that didn't belong. It was a manila folder, thick creased and secured with a brass clasp. No label, no reason to be there. I stared at it for a while. Because at 70, you learn when something is waiting for you. You just don't always want to meet it. I flipped the clasp open and slid the papers out. At first glance, they looked like financial documents. I've had enough bills and statements in my lifetime to recognize the language of money. But then I saw names that made the back of my neck tighten. My name, Elaine's name, and another name I didn't recognize. Thomas E. Grayson. My middle name is Edward. There is no Thomas in my life. There never has been. I told myself it was a typo, a mistake, some clerical error. But a few pages down I saw something that made my hands go numb. A certificate. A formal piece of paper with the kind of seal that tells you this isn't a casual lie. And right there, in clean printed letters, it said, "Amended birth record." My chair creaked under me. I remember thinking, absurdly, this must be about someone else. Because that's what your mind does when reality tries to punch through the wall. It offers you excuses, bargains, and alternatives. But the date matched mine. The county matched mine. And the line that mattered most, the line that turned my stomach into water, was the one that read, "Original record sealed." I didn't understand it at first. Not fully. I stared at those words until they started to blur. Then I heard footsteps. Elaine was in the hallway. I slid the papers back into the folder like a teenager hiding cigarettes. But my hands were clumsy, and I dropped the sheet onto the floor. It floated down slowly like it had time. Elaine appeared in the doorway, already wearing the expression she used when she wanted control of a situation before it became a problem. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. I swallowed, looking for the water heater warranty. She didn't come closer. She stood there watching me the way you watch someone who is holding something fragile and valuable. Then her eyes moved, just slightly, to the paper on the floor. I watched her register it, the way her gaze sharpened like a blade, finding its handle. She stepped forward, bent down, and picked it up. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A shutter closed. She read it once, then again. Then she looked at me and said, "Why are you going through that drawer?" It wasn't a question. It was a boundary. I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Because you told me the warranty was in there." She held the paper between her fingers, and I noticed something I'd never noticed in all our years together. How precise she was with her hands. How controlled, like every gesture had been rehearsed. "That folder," she said, "is not yours." I laughed. An involuntary sound, more disbelief than humor. "Not mine? My name is on it." Elaine's jaw tightened. "Put it back." I didn't. I couldn't. Because the moment someone tells you something isn't yours, you start wondering what else you've been borrowing without knowing. "Elaine," I said, my voice rough, "what is this?" She paused, just long enough for me to feel the weight of it. Then she said, "You don't want to do this right now." I wanted to hear her deny it. I wanted to hear her say, "Walter, it's nothing." I wanted the world to slide back into place. Instead, she said something that still haunts me. She said, "If you open that door, you won't be able to close it again." I stared at her. "What door?" Her eyes flicked toward the folder. "That one." And for the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in her. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing her version of the story. I stood up slowly, the folder in my hands, and I felt like I was holding my own life. Only it wasn't shaped the way I remembered. "Tell me," I said, "right now." Elaine exhaled through her nose, like a woman deciding whether it was worth the effort to explain something to a child. "I told you," she said, voice low. "You don't want to do this right now." I could feel my heart beating in my ears. "Elaine, I am 70 years old. How much more right now do I have?" For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she did something that made my stomach twist even before she spoke. She smiled, not warmly, not kindly, just a small, controlled curve of her lips, like a person who has realized the game is changing and is already planning how to win it. "All right," she said softly. "If you want the truth, we'll do it properly." She walked to the kitchen counter, set the paper down, and turned to face me fully. "I need you to listen," she said, without interrupting. I opened my mouth, but she raised a finger. "Walter," without interrupting. I nodded, because a part of me that spent a lifetime trying to keep peace still existed, even as the floor began to tilt beneath my feet. Elaine folded her hands and began. "Do you remember," she said, "how you used to tell people you were born lucky?" I frowned. "What?" "You were taken," she repeated. "And the people who raised you, they weren't rescuers. They were part of it." I felt the floor shift, the room tilting into some new reality where everything familiar became suspicious. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not possible." Elaine's face tightened with grief. "It is." My hand shook so badly the letter rustled like dry leaves. "Then why did you marry me?" Elaine's eyes locked onto mine. And the answer she gave was the moment I realized betrayal can be a whole architecture, not a single event. "I didn't meet you by accident," she said. My blood turned cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely there. Elaine inhaled, then said, "I was sent to you." And in that instant, I understood something terrible. My marriage, my love story, my entire adult life might have been a continuation of the lie. Elaine reached for the box again and pulled out another photograph. She held it up. It showed a younger version of me, maybe in my early 20s, standing outside a building I didn't recognize. And beside me was a man in a suit, smiling slightly, one hand on my shoulder like he owned me. I stared at the man's face, and a memory flashed, quick, disorienting, of someone watching me from across a parking lot when I was young. A man who'd always looked away before I could focus. Elaine's voice was thin. "Do you remember him?" she asked. I couldn't speak, because I did. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. Elaine swallowed. "Walter, the life you thought you lived." Her voice broke. It was managed. I looked at the photograph again, and then I realized something that made my skin crawl. In the background of the photo, blurred, barely noticeable, was a sign. The sign had a logo, and beneath the logo were words that meant nothing to me at first. But then they did, because they were printed at the top of one of the documents in the folder. Klein Family Trust. I stared. I felt my mind trying to assemble pieces that refused to fit together. Elaine whispered, "He never stopped looking for you. And when he found you," she looked at me like she was begging me to understand, He made sure you would never be able to leave. The refrigerator hummed. The world held its breath. And I stood there with a photograph in my hand, realizing that the betrayal wasn't just that I'd been lied to. It was that someone had built a cage around my entire life and called it love. And the worst part? I didn't yet know if Elaine was the lock or if she was the key. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Elaine stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked drained of blood. I was frozen with that photograph in my hand, staring at the man in the suit like he might step out of the paper and explain himself. The picture smelled faintly of old glue and dust. A lifetime compressed into fibers. I looked up at Elaine. What do you mean he made sure I could never leave? Her eyes flicked to the bedroom door, then back to me. It was a small movement, but it told me everything I needed to know. She was still afraid of someone, or something. And if she was afraid at 70, in our own house, then whatever she had been part of wasn't over. Elaine sat on the edge of the bed as if the weight of her own words had finally reached her bones. Walter, she said quietly, I need you to understand something before you do anything. I've understood enough. I snapped. It came out sharper than I intended, and in the silence that followed, I heard the tremor in my own voice. All these years, every happy memory, I'm supposed to believe it was staged? Elaine flinched. Not staged. Managed. That's a nicer word. She looked down. It's the only word that fits. I set the photo down and held the letter again, reading that last sentence like I could force it to change. If Walter ever finds out, he will come looking for me. And if he comes looking, it will kill him. My hand shook. Why would it kill me? Elaine took a slow breath. Because you're not supposed to know who you are. People who know become problems. My stomach tightened. Problems for who? Elaine closed her eyes. When she opened them, the composure she'd worn for decades had slipped enough for me to see what was underneath. Guilt and something else. Regret that wasn't just emotional. It was practical, like she regretted not burning the evidence earlier. I'm going to tell you everything, she said, but you have to promise me you won't leave this house tonight. I laughed, bitter. Now you want to promise? Elaine's voice hardened. Walter, listen to me. If you walk out with those papers, if you start making calls, if you go the wrong place, someone will know before you even get there. That sentence made the hair on my arms rise. How? I whispered. Elaine's eyes filled. Because it's never been just you and me. The room seemed to narrow around that idea, like the walls were leaning in. I stared at her. Are you telling me we've been watched? Elaine didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. I took a step back, my mouth dry. By who? Elaine swallowed. By the people who paid for your life. I felt something inside me crack, not a dramatic snap, but the slow breaking of something I've been leaning on for years. My life wasn't paid for, I said. I worked. I earned. You earned your paycheck, she interrupted softly. But the framework, the stability, the opportunities, the doors that open when they shouldn't have, those were arranged. I stared at her, my mind racing to the past like a hand flipping through index cards. That scholarship I didn't apply for but somehow received. That promotion that came after a supervisor who barely knew my name called me the right fit. That loan approval I got despite having no collateral at the time. Elaine continued, voice low. Walter, your whole adult life has been guided. I sank into the chair beside the bed, like my legs had forgotten what strength was. Why? Elaine's expression tightened. Because you're an asset. That word. Asset. Not son. Not husband. Not human. Asset. I swallowed hard. To who? Elaine hesitated. Then she reached into the box and pulled out another item, a folded document, thicker than the letter, with a crest embossed on the corner. She placed it on the bed and pushed it toward me. Read the top line, she said. I unfolded it carefully, like it might cut me. At the top, in formal lettering, it read, Klein Family Trust. Private administration agreement. Confidential. My eyes blurred. I forced them to focus. There were names, signatures, dates, and then a phrase that made my throat tighten. Beneficiary. Walter Grayson, formerly recorded as Thomas E. Grayson. Formerly recorded. I whispered. Elaine nodded. That's the name they gave you on paper. Thomas. A record for the record. A buffer. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were shrinking. I scanned further down and saw something that made my stomach roll. Custodial oversight, E. Hartman. I looked at Elaine. Who is Hartman? Her face went pale. The man in the suit. I stared. So he's real. He's very real. I held the paper closer, my fingers trembling as I read. There were clauses I didn't fully understand, legal language that felt deliberately designed to confuse. But I understood the theme. It was an agreement about me, like I was a property with upkeep costs. And then I saw it, a section labeled, Spousal Alignment and Continuity. I read the first line and my heart stalled. Subject spouse to be selected from approved candidates to ensure stability and compliance. My vision narrowed. I looked up at Elaine slowly. Elaine's face was rigid, like she braced herself for impact. You were selected? I asked. Elaine swallowed. Approved. I couldn't breathe. You were sent, I said, my voice hollow, to marry me. Elaine's eyes filled again. At first, yes. At first. That implied something came later. Did you ever love me? I asked. The question was quiet, almost childish, and it disgusted me that I needed to ask it. That at 70 I was still searching for proof that I had mattered to someone. Elaine's shoulders shook. Walter, answer me. Elaine's voice broke. Yes. I stared at her, searching for deception. I'd spent my whole life believing her expressions like scripture, her smiles, her sighs, the way she said my name. Now everything looked like performance. Elaine wiped her eyes quickly, as if tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. I didn't know what I was walking into, she whispered. When I met you, I thought it was just a job, a placement. Make sure you stayed stable. Make sure you didn't wander. Wander, I repeated, voice rising. Like a dog. Elaine flinched. Like someone who didn't know the edges of the world they built around you. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. So my whole marriage, my children, Elaine's face twisted. The children are yours. I froze. Don't say it like you're reassuring me. Elaine shook her head. Walter, listen. I'm not saying your feelings weren't real. I'm saying you were put into a current, and the current was controlled. My hands clenched into fists. And you helped. Elaine nodded, her voice barely audible. I did. The silence that followed felt like standing inside a storm that refused to begin. Then I said, tell me about my parents. Elaine inhaled slowly, as if preparing to open a wound. I didn't know everything, she said. Not at first. I learned pieces over time. But I know enough. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just stared. Elaine continued. Samuel Klein was a powerful man. Not a public figure. Not someone you'd see on the news. But powerful in a way that money becomes a set of keys. I felt the urge to spit, that name out like poison. And he's my father. Elaine nodded. Yes. I leaned forward. Then who raised me? Elaine's jaw tightened. A couple from your hometown. They weren't strangers. They were chosen. They were compensated. They weren't evil in the way you want them to be, Walter, but they were not innocent. I felt like I was falling through decades. You're telling me my mother, I whispered, the woman who kissed my forehead when I was sick. Elaine's eyes shone with tears. She was a mother, but she wasn't your biological mother. My throat tightened. So, who was my real mother? Elaine looked away. When she looked back, her eyes were haunted. She died, Elaine said softly. A cold numbness spread through my chest. How? I asked. Elaine's voice was nearly a whisper. That's the part one never got a straight answer on. But there were rumors. There were payments. And there was always one theme. What? Elaine swallowed. Silence. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to keep my mind from splitting apart. Why was I taken? I asked, why not just leave me with my father if he's so powerful? Elaine stared at the floor for a long time. Then she said, because you were leverage. The word hit harder than asset. Leverage meant conflict, power struggle. Against who? I demanded. Elaine's voice dropped. Against your mother's family. Against people who could have taken you away. Against people who would have exposed what Samuel was. Your existence was inconvenient in the wrong hands. I felt my stomach twist. So instead of fighting in court like a normal person, he stole me. Elaine nodded once. I paced the room, every step scraping into the carpet, like I was trying to grind reality into dust. This can't be true, I muttered. There has to be proof. There has to be records. Elaine's voice was firm. The records are sealed, Walter. Then we unseal them. Elaine stood abruptly. You think it's that simple? I stopped pacing and looked at her. Elaine's fear was back now, sharp and immediate. You don't understand what you're stepping into, she said. If you start pulling threads, people will react. Good, I said. Let them. Elaine shook her head. No, not good. Dangerous. I felt the anger rise, hot and bitter. You've had decades to feel guilty, Elaine. Decades to do the right thing. Elaine's eyes narrowed. Do you think I haven't tried? I froze. What? Elaine's voice cracked with frustration. You think I haven't tried to leave? To tell you? To run? Walter, you don't understand the kind of cage this is. I stared at her, breath shallow. Then tell me. Elaine took a shaky breath. I tried once. 15 years ago. I called a lawyer. A real one, not one connected to them. My mind flashed to that year. Elaine had been sick for weeks, quiet, withdrawn. I'd assumed it was menopause, stress, something ordinary. What happened? I asked. Elaine's jaw tightened. The next day, our bank account froze. Not a full freeze, just enough to scare me. My phone started dropping calls. A man showed up at church and shook my hand like he knew me. The man in the suit? Elaine nodded. Hartman. My stomach clenched. He threatened you. Elaine's eyes were glassy. He didn't have to. He just reminded me. He said, Elaine, the trust pays for stability. Don't make instability. I felt a chill, and you obeyed. Elaine's voice was small. I survived. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw her not as my wife, not even as my betrayer, just as an aging woman who had been swallowed by a machine bigger than either of us. But sympathy didn't erase the damage. So what now? I asked. Elaine swallowed hard. Now you decide whether you want to live the rest of your life not knowing or whether you want to risk everything for the truth. I stared at the documents on the bed. My hands still shook, but underneath the shaking, something else was forming. A decision. I need to verify this, I said, voice firm. I need to see my original birth record. I need to know who my mother was. I need to know what happened to her. Elaine's eyes widened. Walter, I'm not asking permission. Elaine stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then do it smart. I narrowed my eyes. What does that mean? Elaine looked toward the window again, like she expected headlights to sweep across our yard any second. It means you don't go to the county office, she whispered. You don't call the hotline. You don't walk into a courthouse waving papers. Those are monitored. Those are traps. My blood ran cold. How do you know? Elaine's voice dropped even further. Because I've seen the reports. Reports? Elaine hesitated. Then she reached into the box again and pulled out a thin bundle of papers tied with twine. She handed them to me. They were photocopies. Old. Faded. At the top of the first page, in block letters, it read, Subject Monitoring Summary, W. Grayson. I stared, pulse pounding. Below it were lines of typed observations. Small things. Trivial things. Subject attended church. Spoke with Pastor Reynolds. Duration 12 minutes. Subject purchased hardware supplies. Cash transaction. No anomalies. Subject displayed mild agitation after receiving letter. Probable aging stress. I couldn't breathe. They had been watching me. Every step. Every errand. Every conversation. I looked up at Elaine, my voice shaking with rage. How long? Elaine's face crumpled. All along. I felt the room spin again. Then I saw a date at the bottom of the page. 2 weeks ago. This wasn't historical. This was current. Someone was still writing reports about me. Someone was still here. And then I saw another line. A line that made my blood freeze. Subject, discovered sealed file in kitchen drawer. Spouse engaged. Containment risk elevated. My vision tunneled. They know, I whispered. Elaine nodded, tears spilling now. Yes. I felt something primal rise in me. Fear, fury, disbelief, twisting together. They know I found out. I said, louder now, like saying it would make it less true. Elaine grabbed my arm. Walter, please, keep your voice down. I ripped my arm away. What do you mean containment risk elevated? Elaine's face was white. It means they will act. A thud sounded outside. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of something, maybe a gate, maybe a trash can, shifting. But in that moment, it sounded like the world itself moving closer. Elaine's eyes snapped toward the window. So did mine. I walked slowly to the curtains and pulled them back just a fraction. Our yard was dark, but the streetlight at the corner cast a dull amber haze. And there, parked half a block down, was a car I had never seen before. No headlights, engine off, just sitting, watching. In the driver's seat, a figure leaned forward slightly, as if they had been waiting for movement, for proof. My chest tightened. Elaine's voice came behind me, trembling. Walter, she whispered, they're here. And in that moment, I understood the truth wasn't a past event I was uncovering. It was an active situation, a live wire. I turned to Elaine, the papers shaking in my hand. What do we do? I asked. Elaine's eyes met mine, and for the first time she looked less like a controlled architect in my life and more like a prisoner who'd been forced to play guard. She swallowed. Then she said, we leave right now, but not the way you think. I stared. Where? Elaine grabbed the box, shoved it into a tote bag, and rushed to the closet. There's a place, she said. Someone who owes me, someone who hates Hartman. She stopped, looked at me, and her voice hardened into something I'd never heard from her before, certainly born from desperation. But Walter, if we do this, you have to be ready to learn the part you're going to hate most. My throat tightened. What part? Elaine's eyes were wet, but steady. The part where you realize, she whispered. You weren't only a victim. The sentence hit me like a blow. What does that mean? I demanded. Elaine shook her head, grabbing her coat. We don't have time. Outside, the car door opened. A soft click in the night. A silhouette stepped out and began walking, slowly, toward our house. Elaine's hands moved fast, but not frantic. That was what terrified me most. Panic is human. Panic is what you expect when the world is collapsing. Elaine wasn't panicking. She was executing. She pulled a small suitcase from the closet, not the big one we use for vacations, but compact one that looked like it had been waiting behind winter coats for years. She didn't fumble with the zipper. She didn't hesitate. She opened it and started dropping things in with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this in her head long before tonight. Elaine, I said, my voice low, who is that? She didn't look up. Someone you don't talk to. Outside, the silhouette moved under the streetlight's weak halo, crossing the distance in measured steps, not sneaking, not hurried, like a man approaching a business meeting. The porch boards creaked as the figure climbed the steps. Then there was a knock, not pounding, not threatening, just 3 taps, polite controlled. Elaine froze. For half a second, the mask slipped, and I saw real fear. Then it was back. She looked at me. Do not open that door, she whispered. I stared at her. We can't just... The knock came again. 3 taps. Elaine stepped toward the dresser and pressed her fingers to the hidden latch. The compartment slid open. She reached inside and pulled out something I'd never seen her handle before. A cell phone. Not her phone. Smaller. Older. A burner. She held it like it was hot. We leave through the back. she said. I glanced at the bedroom door. The hallway beyond it suddenly felt like a tunnel. What about, I started. Elaine cut me off. Walter, now. A third knock, slightly louder. Still polite. My heart hammered. I took the tote bag with the documents, shoved my arms into my coat, and followed Elaine into the hallway. We moved silently, stepping in the spots that didn't creak. Elaine knew which board complained. She'd always known. I used to think it was just her preference for quiet. Now I understood it was habit. We reached the kitchen. The front door was only 10 feet away. Another knock. Then a voice came through the wood, calm as a weather report. Mrs. Grayson. Elaine stopped breathing. The voice continued. It's late. I apologize. I recognized it, not from memory, but from instinct. The same kind of voice you hear in corporate training videos. Smooth, careful, trained to lower defenses. Elaine's face was pale. Don't answer, she mouthed. The voice resumed, as if it could see her. Mrs. Grayson, I'd like to speak with you. It's important. Elaine looked at me, eyes sharp. She pointed toward the back door. We move again, but the silence broke under my own breathing. I sounded too loud in my own ears. We reached the back door. Elaine's hand hovered over the lock, and then the voice at the front door said something that made us both stop. Walter, I know you're awake. My blood turned cold. Elaine's hand tightened on the lock. The voice was still calm, still polite. Walter, I know you found the folder. I know you have questions. I can answer them. My throat tightened. I whispered, how does he know my name? Elaine's eyes flashed. Of course he knows your name, they said. He knows everything. The voice outside continued. It doesn't have to be difficult. You have lived well. You have been protected. We can keep it that way. Elaine's jaw clenched. She turned the lock. The back door creaked, just a fraction. And then, from somewhere behind the house, a flashlight clicked on. A beam cut across the yard. Elaine froze. So, did I? Someone was already back there. I felt my stomach drop. Elaine whispered. 2 of them. The flashlight beam moved slowly, deliberate, scanning the yard like a man checking inventory. The voice in the front door carried again, now with a faint edge. Please remain inside. Elaine's eyes met mine, and I saw a calculation, not surrender. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the pantry. I stumbled, confused. Elaine, what are you doing? She pressed her finger to her lips and yanked open the pantry door. Inside, behind canned goods and a stack of old paper towels. She pushed aside a wooden panel. There was a narrow opening, a crawl space. My mouth opened. What the hell is that? Elaine didn't answer. She shoved the tote bag through first. Then she looked at me. Get in. You've had a hidden crawl space in our pantry? I hissed. Elaine's eyes were fierce. Walter, we do not have time for your outrage. Outside, the front door handle turned slightly, then stopped. A test. A demonstration. Elaine pushed me toward the opening. The smell hit me first. Earth, old wood, damp insulation. I crouched and crawled inside. Elaine followed, pulling the panel back into place behind us. Darkness swallowed us. I heard the pantry door close. We were inside our own house, hiding like thieves. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might knock loose my ribs. In the crawl space, Elaine pulled out a small flashlight and covered it with her palm, so only a thin sliver of light escaped. Move, she whispered. We crawled forward on our elbows. The space was tight. Dust clung to my throat. I could feel cobwebs brushing my forehead. Every movement sounded like thunder in my own head. We reached a junction, 2 directions. Elaine turned left without hesitation. How do you know where to go? I whispered. Elaine didn't answer. That, too, was an answer. Above us, I heard footsteps inside the kitchen. Soft, controlled. The sound of someone who had entered without breaking anything. Then I heard Elaine's voice in my mind. Earlier, it's never been just you and me. My chest tightened. We crawled faster. The crawl space opened into a slightly wider area near the back wall of the house. Elaine stopped and reached upward. She pushed against another panel. This one gave way. A draft of cold air hit my face. We were under the back porch. Elaine slid out first into the darkness beneath the porch and motioned for me to follow. I emerged into night air, gasping like I'd surfaced from underwater. Above us, the porch board was still. No one was standing there. The flashlight beam in the yard had moved away, sweeping toward the fence line. Elaine whispered, "Stay low." We crouched and moved along the underside of the porch, hugging the shadows. Elaine led us toward the side of the house, where an old lattice panel had been loosened. She pulled us aside. We slipped through. Now we were outside. Free, if you could call it that. We moved along the side yard, staying beneath bushes and trees. The parked car down the street was still there, but now, closer, I could see another car at the corner. Dark, idling, a second set of eyes. Elaine's voice was barely a breath. "They don't want a scene." I whispered, "Then why are they here?" Elaine's jaw tightened. "Because you cross a line." We reached the back fence. Elaine pushed on it, and it swung open silently. It wasn't latched. My stomach turned. "You left it open?" Elaine didn't answer. We slipped into the neighbor's yard, then into the next. Elaine moved like she'd done this before, cutting through yards, avoiding light, stepping over garden hoses without looking down. My lungs burned. My knees complained. 70 years old, running like a boy trying to outrun a nightmare. We reached the street 2 blocks away. Elaine pointed toward an old pickup parked under a tree. It wasn't ours. The truck's paint was faded, the tires dusty, but it looked maintained. Elaine walked straight to it. I grabbed her arm. "Elaine, whose truck is that?" Elaine reached into her pocket and pulled out keys. "My contingency," she said. I stared at her. "Your contingency?" She unlocked the door, got in, and started the engine. It came to life immediately, as if it had been driven yesterday. Elaine leaned across the seat and unlocked the passenger side. "Walter," she said, voice firm, "get in." I climbed in, shaking. Elaine reversed slowly, not squealing the tires, not drawing attention. We rolled out of the neighborhood like 2 people leaving a dinner party. But as we turned onto the main road, headlights appeared in the mirror behind us. Not close, but present. Elaine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They followed," I whispered. Elaine nodded. "Of course." We drove through dim streets, past closed storefronts, past a gas station with flickering neon. Elaine kept the speed steady. No sudden turns. No panic. As if she knew panic was what they wanted. She turned onto an industrial road near the docks. Warehouses, empty lots, rusted chain-link fences. The headlights behind us stayed far enough to seem coincidental, but I could feel them like pressure on the back of my neck. Elaine drove for several minutes without speaking. Then she said, "When I tell you to, you run." I looked at her. "Run where?" Elaine's eyes were fixed ahead. "You will see." We approached a warehouse with a broken sign and a loading bay door half open. Elaine turned into the lot and drove behind the building, out of sight from the main road. She killed the engine. Silence. My heartbeat filled the cab. Elaine reached under the seat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was cash. "Hundreds." She shoved it into my hand. "If we get separated, you take this." I stared at her. "Elaine, what are you doing?" Elaine's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago." Before I could speak, headlights swept across the far end of the lot. They were here. Elaine's jaw clenched. "Now." She opened her door and stepped out. I grabbed her arm. "Elaine." She turned and cupped my face briefly. So briefly, I wonder if it happened at all. "Walter," she whispered, "if you ever believed I loved you, believe me now." Then she slammed the door and ran, not away, but toward the warehouse. My brain lagged behind. "Elaine." She waved her arm violently at me through the windshield, pointing toward the opposite direction. "Run." Another car turned into the lot, slowing like a predator that didn't need to rush. I shoved the cash into my pocket, got out, and sprinted the way Elaine pointed. My knees screamed. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard a door slam. then footsteps on gravel, then a voice, closer now, not through a door. Walter. It was the same voice as before. Calm, polite, but now there was steel underneath. I ran between stacks of pallets, past a row of dumpsters, toward a chain-link fence that bordered the back of the lot. I spotted a gap where the fence had been cut and patched poorly. I shoved through, scraping my shoulder on metal. I stumbled into a narrow strip of weeds and broken glass behind the warehouse. The headlights swept the lot, searching. I crouched low, breathing hard, my hands shaking. From my position, I could see the lot partially. Elaine was near the warehouse door, standing with her hands raised slightly, like she was signaling she was unarmed. Two men approached her. One was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark jacket. The other was smaller, wearing a baseball cap, a flashlight in his hand. Then a third man stepped into view, and even from a distance, I knew. Suit, posture, the same clean, controlled silhouette from a photo. Hartman. He walked toward Elaine like a man walking into an office. He stopped a few feet from her. They spoke, but I couldn't hear the words. Then Hartman lifted his hand, almost gently, and touched Elaine's cheek. Not affection. Ownership. Elaine didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady. Hartman said something, and Elaine shook her head. Then Elaine pointed, subtly, toward the area where I had run. My stomach twisted. Was she giving me up, or was she misdirecting? Hartman's head tilted. He looked toward the back of the lot. His posture changed slightly. Then he nodded to the man in the cap, who began walking in my direction. I held my breath. My mind raced. Elaine betrayed me again. Then I saw Elaine's hands. Her fingers curled into a tight fist. She did something fast, too fast to fully understand. She stepped forward, as if to hug Hartman. Hartman didn't resist. He leaned in slightly, perhaps expecting compliance. Elaine's hand flashed, a small metallic glint, and then Hartman staggered back. Elaine had driven something into him, something sharp. A knife. My stomach lurched. Hartman's face twisted, not in pain at first, but in shock that she would dare. The two men grabbed her arms. Elaine didn't fight them. She shouted something, loud enough for the night to carry. Run, Walter. My throat tightened. Hartman clutched at his side, then straightened, fury replacing surprise. He barked an order. The man in the cap turned and ran back toward the lot, away from me, toward the street. I realized what Elaine had done. She hadn't tried to kill Hartman. She'd bought time. I stumbled backward, still crouched, moving through weeds and darkness. I found a narrow alley between warehouses that led toward the docks. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, pain screaming from my knees. Behind me, I heard Ray's voices. Then a single sound that turned my blood to ice. A gunshot, sharp, final. I froze, my whole body locked. Then another sound, less sharp, a thud, and then nothing. No screams, no chaos, just the hum of distant highway noise and the faint clink of metal. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Elaine, I whispered, but I didn't stop moving, because I understood something in my bones. If I stopped, her sacrifice meant nothing. I moved through the dockyard like a ghost, hiding behind containers and stacks of rope, until I reached a narrow road that led toward an old diner I remember from years ago, one of those all-night places truckers used to frequent. The lights were on. I stumbled inside, breath ragged. A woman behind the counter looked up, startled. "Sir, are you okay?" I must have looked like a man clawed out of a grave. I tried to speak, but my voice came out broken. "I need a phone." The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. Behind the counter. I walked toward it, hands trembling. As I reached her phone, I saw a small newspaper stack on the counter. My eyes caught a headline on the top paper. Not national news. Local. But the name in the article made my stomach drop. Klein Family Trust announces major local donation. A smiling photo accompanied it. A man shaking hands with a mayor. And behind him, slightly out of focus, standing like a shadow, Hartman, alive, smiling, No wound visible. My breath caught. I looked closer at the date. It was from 3 days ago. A donation. A public appearance. A reminder. This man moved in the open, protected by legitimacy. I felt the floor tilt again. Because if Hartman was public, then they weren't just criminals. They were an institution. And then I remembered what Elaine had said. You weren't only a victim. My hand shook as I dialed the first number that came to mind. An old friend from my hometown. Someone who'd known me since childhood. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered, groggy. Hello? I swallowed, my throat burning. Jim, I said, barely able to form a word. It's Walter. A pause. Then, strangely, Jim's voice sharpened. Walter? Yes. Another pause, longer. Then Jim said something that made my blood go cold. You shouldn't be calling me. I froze. What? Jim's voice dropped to a whisper. Walter, listen. Hang up. Now. My heart pounded. Jim, what are you talking about? Jim's breathing sounded strained. Walter, I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. My mouth went dry. Sorry for what? Jim's voice cracked. For what we did. And in that moment, with Hartman's smile staring up at me from a newspaper, I understood. The lie wasn't built by strangers alone. It was built by people I trusted. People who'd watched me grow up. People who'd smiled at me in church. People who'd called me family. Jim whispered into the phone. They told us it was the only way. My vision blurred. What way? I demanded. Jim's voice was shaking now. To keep you alive? And then the line went dead. Not a hang-up. A cut. The dial tone buzzed like an alarm in my ear. The waitress stared at me. Concerned, I stood there with the receiver in my hand, realizing the next terrible truth. If my own hometown was part of it, then there was nowhere I could run that wasn't already mapped. And somewhere in that web was the answer Lane said I would hate most. Because it wasn't just that they had controlled my life. It was that they had turned me into something useful, something profitable, something complicit. The diner's fluorescent lights made everything look sickly and unreal, like the world had been drained of color on purpose. I set the receiver down slowly and stared at the dial tone as if it had something else to say. Jim's last words replayed in my head with a cruel, steady rhythm. For what we did, to keep you alive. A life preserved by theft is not a life. It's a possession. The waitress hovered nearby, her face tight with concern. Sir, do you need me to call someone? I wanted to laugh. Call who? The people who own my name? Instead, I nodded once, forcing my voice to work. Just water, please. She walked away, and I pulled the cash Elaine had shoved into my hand from my coat pocket. My fingers still shook, but not from fear anymore. From clarity. Elaine had said there was someone who owed her, someone who hated Hartman. I didn't know where that person was. But Elaine had always had patterns. The kind of woman who hid things didn't scatter them randomly. She built systems. I closed my eyes and tried to remember every odd errand, every weekend drive, every place Elaine insisted we pass by just in case. And one memory surfaced, sharp as a needle, a storage facility near the docks. Years ago, Elaine had said it was for Christmas decorations, but she'd refused to let me come inside. I'd waited in the truck, annoyed and confused, while she disappeared behind a gate and returned with nothing in her arms. I paid for water. I barely drank and left the diner before my legs could change their mind. Outside, the night air was cold. I stayed off main roads, kept to dim streets, and walked until my knees burned and my chest wheezed. I was 70. The city didn't care. I found a payphone near a closed laundromat, one of the last in the area, faded and scarred like an artifact that refused to die. I fed it coins from my pocket and dialed the number printed on the side of a key tag I had found in Elaine's tote bag, a storage unit code. The line rang twice. Then a man answered. Yeah. I swallowed. I need the Harbor Lock storage facility. Unit number. I read it from the tag. I need access. Silence. Then the man said, Who is this? I hesitated. Then I made a decision. Elaine Grayson is dead. I said, though I didn't truly know. Or she's close. Hartman came. The silence on the other end hardened, like water turning to ice. Say that again, the man said. Hartman came. I repeated. Elaine got me out. She said someone owed her. She said someone hated him. A slow exhale. Where are you? I didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, I said, if you're connected to her, you know why you shouldn't ask. Another pause. Then the man said, go to the facility. Don't call again. If you're lying, you'll regret it. If you're not. He didn't finish. He hung up. I stared at the deadline and felt my pulse move into my throat. I walked. The storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence with razor wire at the top. The kind of place that promised security, but always looked like a prison from the outside. The office lights were off. The gate, however, was slightly open, as if someone had anticipated my arrival. I stepped through carefully. The rows of units stretched into the darkness like metal coffins. Somewhere a motion sensor clicked, and a single floodlight flickered on, casting long shadows. I found the unit number. My hands shook as I entered the code. The lock clicked. The door rolled upward with a groan, and a stale, cold smell drifted out. Dust, cardboard, old fabric, secrets. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, as if someone had tried to make chaos look respectable. And in the center, on a folding table, was a single object that didn't belong with holiday decorations or old clothes. A file safe. Black. Heavy. The kind used for documents people kill for. I stepped closer. My breath caught. The safe was already open, and someone was standing just inside the shadows, near the back wall. Walter Grayson. The voice said. My spine locked. The figure stepped forward into the light. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a hard jaw and tired eyes. He wore a navy jacket and work boots, but carried himself like someone trained to be dangerous without looking it. In his hand was a pistol, not aimed at me, not lowered either. Balanced. Ready? Who are you? I asked, my voice unsteady. The man watched me for a long moment, then said, Name's Caleb Mercer. It meant nothing to me. He nodded toward the safe. Elaine told me if the day ever came you saw the truth, you'd come here. I swallowed, so she knew this would happen. Mercer's mouth tightened. She planned for it. I stepped closer to the table, eyes fixed on the safe's contents. Inside were folders, thick, labeled with careful handwriting. There were photographs, old IDs, bank statements, legal papers, a thumb drive in a small plastic case, and at the top, resting like a verdict, was a single sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Elaine's precise hand, were the words, For Walter, if he finds out. My hands hovered over it. Mercer watched me. Before you open that, you need to know something. I looked up. What? Mercer's eyes were cold. Hartman will come for you. Not because you're sentimental. Not because of love or family. He nodded toward the papers. Because you're a key. My throat tightened. A key to what? Mercer exhaled slowly. To money. To influence. To cover. I stared at him. How do you know any of this? His gaze flicked to my face. Because I used to work for them. The words landed like a stone. I backed up a step. So you're one of them. Mercer shook his head once. I was. Then I realized what Hartman really does with people. I swallowed. What does he do? Mercer's jaw flexed. He builds lives. He engineers stability. Then he uses those lives as shields. He gestured toward the trust documents. You're the shield. I felt bile rise in my throat. I reached for the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a letter. Elaine's handwriting was unmistakable. Clean, controlled, every line straight as a ruler. I read the first sentence and felt my chest tighten. Walter, if you're reading this, the worst has already happened. My eyes moved down the page. I lied to you. I betrayed you. And I loved you anyway. I know that is not the kind of love you deserved, but it is the only love I had that was not purchased. My throat burned. They sent me to you. because you were valuable, not for who you were, but for who you could represent. An ordinary man with an extraordinary paper trail, a clean face, a stable life, a name with legitimacy. I looked up at Mercer, who watched without expression. My eyes returned to the letter. Samuel Klein is your biological father. Your biological mother was named Marion Rowe. She did not abandon you. She tried to keep you. She fought. She lost. My hand started shaking harder. Marion died in 1957. The official story is complications. The unofficial truth is that she was silenced. My vision blurred. Elaine's letter continued. You were taken in place of the Graysons because they could be trusted to keep you contained. They were paid. They were threatened. They were told it was for your protection. They believed it or pretended to. I swallowed hard. If you want proof, it is in the safe. There's a death certificate. There are hospital records. There's a photograph of Marion. There's also the one thing Hartman never wanted you to have. Your original name. I flipped through the folders with trembling hands until I found a thin packet labeled Marion Rowe, Original Records. Inside was a photocopy of a birth certificate, older format, typewritten, stamped. And there it was, not Walter Grayson, not Thomas Grayson, a different name, Walter Rowe. My throat closed. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Mercer spoke quietly. You were her son. My voice came out broken. Why would they change everything? Mercer leaned back against a metal wall, eyes tired. Because Marion was a wrong woman, and Samuel was the wrong kind of man to be told no. I kept reading Elaine's letter. Now, the part you will hate. My breath caught. They didn't just hide you. They used you. I felt my pulse pound. The trust has moved money through your name for decades. Donations, foundations, shell companies. When the public sees your signature on charity paperwork, they see a harmless old man. They see virtue. They see stability. But behind the donations are transactions that have nothing to do with charity. I looked up sharply. What transactions? Mercer's voice was grim. The kind that disappear people. The kind that buy silence. The kind that make entire towns cooperate. My stomach rolled. I grabbed another folder labeled W. Grayson, authorized signatures. Inside were dozens of documents, some with my signature. My signature. I stared, horrified, because I recognized the curves, the slant, the way I looped the G. But I had never signed these papers. Never. Mercer spoke before I could. They got samples. They had access. You signed legitimate things, mortgages, taxes, bank forms. Then they copied it. I felt sick. So my name has been laundering their sins. Mercer nodded. Your clean life was their camouflage. Elaine's letter went on. I stayed because I believed at first that you were safer inside the lie than outside it. That is a lie I told myself, so I could live with what I did. Then I realized they weren't protecting you. They were keeping you close, because you were useful. I have enclosed a drive. On it is everything I could gather, names, recordings, accounts. If you choose to go to the authorities, do not go local. Go federal. Go public. I found the thumb drive. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. Mercer nodded once. She collected evidence for years. Quietly. I stared at him. Why didn't she give it to me sooner? Mercer's expression softened just slightly. Because she was terrified. And because she didn't want to destroy the only life you knew until she couldn't protect you from the truth anymore. A memory crashed into me then. Elaine insisting on taking the mail first. Elaine keeping our finances organized. Elaine discouraging me from reconnecting with people from my hometown. Containment. Not marriage. A managed environment. I looked down at Marion's records again. There was a photograph tucked inside. A young woman with dark hair and an exhausted smile, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. The baby's face was half hidden, but the shape of the nose, the soft curve of the mouth, it was me, or the beginning of me. A sound came out my throat, half sob, half laugh. She was real. Mercer watched me with something like respect. She was I swallowed hard. So what now? Mercer's eyes sharpened. Now you decide whether you want to disappear quietly or whether you want to burn the machine down. The words made my stomach tighten. Burn it down how? Mercer stepped forward and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a second phone, newer than Elaine's, but still untraceable looking. I have a contact, he said. Investigative journalist. National outlet. Not local. Not bought. He paused. And I have a contact in the FBI. But once you do this, there's no going back. I stared at Marion's photo again. Then I thought of Elaine, standing under warehouse lights, screaming for me to run. I didn't know if she was dead, but I knew what she had tried to do. She had tried to give me the one thing she'd stolen from me for decades. Choice. I lifted my gaze to Mercer. We go public, I said. Mercer nodded once. Then we do it fast. We left the storage unit with the safe's contents divided into 2 bags, one with originals, one with copies. Mercer insisted we keep them separated. Redundancy. Survival. He drove an old sedan with plates from another state. We didn't go to a hotel. We didn't go to a friend. We went to a cheap motel by the interstate, the kind of place where nobody looked anyone in the eye. Mercer paid cash. No names. In the room, he plugged the thumb drive into a small laptop. A folder opened. Inside were audio files, scanned documents, and a spreadsheet of names. At the top was one video file. Mercer clicked it. Elaine's face appeared on screen. Not to compose Elaine from my life, but a woman who looked hollowed out by fear and purpose. She spoke directly to the camera. Walter, she said, voice trembling, if you're watching this, I'm either gone or I'm no longer able to protect you. My hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Elaine continued. Hartman will tell you I did this for money. He will tell you I never loved you. He will tell you you're unstable. Do not believe him. She swallowed. I was sent to you. Yes, and I stayed because I became yours in the only way I could, by choosing you privately, even when I served them publicly. Her eyes glistened. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then her expression hardened. I'm also going to tell you the truth about the part you'll hate. My chest tightened. Elaine leaned closer to the camera. Walter, they didn't just use your name. They used your life to build a narrative so believable that when it came time to move certain people, certain funds, certain problems, they could say, look, this is a respectable trust. Look at our beneficiary. Look at Walter Grayson, a good man, a stable life, a church-going American. Nothing dirty here. She exhaled. And the worst part is this. The trust has a clause. If you die publicly, if your death becomes a scandal, the machine collapses. That is why they have kept you alive. That is why they will not kill you in a way anyone can see. My blood ran cold. They will try to erase you, Elaine said. They will try to make you vanish. Or they will try to make you look insane. She paused. Walter, the only way out is sunlight. You must become too visible to take. The video ended. The silence in the motel room was heavy enough to crush bone. Mercer looked at me. That's the play. Visibility. I swallowed. Then we make me visible. Over the next 12 hours, Mercer moved like a man who had practiced this for years. He created duplicate copies of everything. He encrypted files. He drafted an email to the journalist with key documents attached. Not all of them, just enough to make it impossible to ignore. He sent another message to the federal contact. Then at dawn, he did something I didn't expect. He set up his phone on the motel table and hit record. State your name, he said. I stared at the lens. My face looked older than I felt. Creased, tired, eyes haunted. I took a breath. My name is Walter Grayson, I said. Then I swallowed and added, I was born Walter Rowe. I was taken as a baby. I had discovered evidence that my identity was altered and used for decades by the Klein Family Trust. My voice broke, but I forced it steady. I am making this statement publicly because I believe my life is in immediate danger, and because I believe the organization that used me has committed crimes against other people. Mercer nodded. Good. Now tell them what you found. So I did. I held Marion's photograph up to the camera. I spoke her name. I spoke Hartman's name. I spoke Samuel Klein's name. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I had been managed my whole life, but words, spoken openly, were something they couldn't fully control. 2 hours later, the journalist called. Her voice was sharp, professional, skeptical in the way a good reporter is skeptical. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "if what you're saying is true, this is enormous. But I need to verify. I need originals. I need a trail." Mercer looked at me, then nodded. "You'll have it," I said. By noon, we met the journalist in a public place, a crowded airport cafe where cameras were everywhere, and people were too busy to notice a man unraveling his life. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, eyes like a hawk. She brought 2 colleagues. Mercer handed her copies first, then held the originals close. She scanned, asked questions, cross-checked dates. Then she saw Marion's records, and her face changed. "This is," she murmured, "this is a sealed record trail." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't just family drama. This is systematic." I felt my throat tighten. "So you believe me?" "I believe there's something here," she said. "Enough to move." Then her eyes lifted, sweeping the cafe. "Mr. Grayson," she said softly, "I think you're being watched." My skin went cold. Mercer's head turned slightly. His posture shifted. A man across the cafe stood up, baseball cap, plain jacket, average face. The kind of man you don't remember. He raised his phone as if taking a casual photo. Then he turned and walked away. Mercer leaned in. "We leave. Now." We stood, moving calmly, blending into foot traffic. The journalist's colleague slipped away toward airport security, already making calls. Mercer guided me toward a restroom corridor. Then through a service door he'd clearly scoped out in advance. We moved into a maintenance hallway and exited through another door into a taxi stand. Mercer shoved a bill at the driver. "Drive. Don't ask where. Just drive." The taxi pulled away. Only once we were moving did Mercer exhale. "They're escalating," he said. I stared out the window at the city sliding past. Sunlight too bright for the ugliness underneath. "What happens now?" I asked. Mercer's voice was hard. "Now Hartman tries to control the narrative. If he can't take you, he'll try to discredit you." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed. Not my usual phone. I didn't even know how it had service. Elaine's old burner in my pocket. A text message appeared from an unknown number. "Walter, please stop. You have been misled. Return the files. We can make this easy." Mercer glanced at it and snorted. "Easy means quiet." Another message followed immediately. "Elaine is safe. Do not force our hand." My chest tightened. "Elaine!" Mercer's eyes narrowed. "That's bait or leverage." I swallowed. "If she's alive." Mercer cut me off. "If she's alive, they'll use her to control you. If she's dead, they'll use her ghost." The taxi turned onto a highway. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was an incoming call. No caller ID. Mercer's gaze locked onto mine. "Do not answer." But something in me, something stubborn, something tired of being moved like a piece, reached for the phone anyway. I answered. Hartman's voice filled my ear like warm poison. "Walter," he said, smooth as ever, "you're making a mistake." I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. "You stole my life." Hartman sighed, as if disappointed by my tone. "We preserved your life. You killed my mother." A pause. Then Hartman said, "Your mother was unstable." Rage surged so hot I tasted metal. "Say her name." Hartman chuckled softly. "You're emotional. That's expected." "Say her name," I repeated, voice shaking. Hartman's tone hardened a fraction. "Walter," he said, "you've been comfortable. You have been safe. You have been honored in your community. That was not an accident. That was us." I whispered, "I never asked for it." Hartman's voice became colder. "No one asked for structure. They simply benefit from it." I stared out the taxi window at the blur of cars. Then I said, I'm going public. Hartman was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and there was no politeness left. If you do this, you will lose everything. I laughed, a broken sound. I already did. Hartman's voice dropped to a low, controlled threat. Walter, he said, you will be remembered as a confused old man who destroyed his own family. I felt tears burn, but I forced my voice steady. My family was destroyed when you took me. Hartman sighed. Then he said something that finally clarified the entire machine. You were never meant to be loved, he said. You were meant to be believed. And then he hung up. Mercer watched me carefully. You got what you needed? I swallowed. Yes. What? I stared forward. Proof that he exists, that he's not a story, that he thinks he owns me. Mercer nodded once. Good. The journalist report hit the internet that evening. Not a full expose, too soon for that, but a verified breaking story. Sealed records, trust documents, allegations corroborated by independent experts, and my recorded statement. And once my face was public, something changed. The machine didn't stop, but it hesitated, because sunlight makes predators cautious. Within 48 hours, federal agents contacted the journalist, then me. They met us in a secure location and took custody of the originals. They listened to Elaine's recording. They reviewed the spreadsheet of names. And then, quietly, without fanfare, they began pulling threads. 2 weeks later, I sat alone in a small room, fluorescent lights humming above, as an agent slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a photograph, a mugshot. Hartman, different name now, but the same eyes. The agent said, Mr. Rowe, we've been looking for this man for a long time. Rowe, hearing it from someone else made my chest ache. The agent continued, the trust is larger than him, but he was a key operator. I swallowed. What about Elaine? The agent's face tightened. We located her, he said carefully. My breath caught. Alive? A pause. Then he nodded once. Alive. My whole body sagged, relief and grief mixing like poison and medicine. She's cooperating, the agent added. She's in protective custody. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Not because everything was fixed. Nothing was fixed. But because for the first time, someone else was holding the weight of the truth with me. Months passed. The story expanded. More names surfaced. More victims came forward. More documents appeared. A machine that had run quietly for decades began to grind under scrutiny. My hometown, the place I'd once considered sacred, became a crime scene in the eyes of the public. People I'd known all my life suddenly looked like strangers with rehearsed smiles. I learned that Marion Rowe had been 18 when she had me, that she had written letters begging to see her son, that those letters never reached anyone who would help. I learned Samuel Klein lived much longer than anyone had told me. He hadn't vanished. He'd simply moved above consequence. And then one day, in a safe house with plain walls and heavy locks, I saw Elaine again. She looked older. So did I. We sat across from each other at a small table. No romance. No softness. Just two people who had lived inside a lie in different ways. Elaine's hands trembled. Walter, I stared at her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Elaine's eyes filled. Because I thought the truth would kill you. I nodded slowly. It almost did. Elaine swallowed. I was wrong. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, did you love me? Elaine's face twisted with pain. Yes. I believed her. And that was a tragedy. Because love inside a cage still bruises you when you move. I didn't forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness is not a switch. But I also didn't deny what I felt, because denial had already stolen too much of my life. I left the safe house and walked outside into sunlight that felt unfamiliar, like a new country. At 70, I had no childhood to reclaim, no mother to embrace, no clean history to rest inside. But I had something else, a name that belonged to the truth, and a choice. I began recording again, not as a victim begging to be believed, but as a man determined to make the story impossible to bury. I made a YouTube channel under a simple title, Walter Rowe, The Truth Files. I posted my statement, Marion's photo, the timeline, the documents the authorities allowed me to share, and the comments came. Thousands. People who had been manipulated, people who had lost family, people who had been told they were crazy. Sunlight spreads. 1 year later, I returned to the coast where I'd lived quietly for 15 years. My house was still there. The porch swing still creaked. But the silence felt different. Not the silence of denial, the silence of aftermath. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee and Marion's photograph in front of me. I traced her face with my finger and whispered, "I'm sorry I found you too late." Outside, birds moved across the yard. Ordinary. Free. And for the first time in my life, the story I lived didn't feel like a script someone else wrote. It felt like mine. Not because it was happy. Not because it was healed. But because it was true. And in the end, that was the only kind of life worth having. The end.